The Democrats want to complain about voter suppression and how Republicans wanting a recount is just trying to suppress votes. But they also want to suppress one of the most fundamental rights given to us by our Constitution. So let's talk about a little hypocrisy. I know this is, could be a little bit strange to talk about gun sales and voter fraud together, but just go with me on this. Hopefully, it's going to all come together and make some sense. But right now, the media is reporting that approximately 300,000 guns may have been sold so far this year to people without background checks. Well, technically, the background checks were started, but due to the law that allows a sale to proceed if the background check result isn't returned within 72 hours, the sales could have occurred. That 300,000 is out of over right now, about 32 million background checks that have been done as of end of October of this year, 2020. That's less than 1% of background checks that have resulted in the possibility of a firearm transfer due to the delay with the system. They aren't saying all these people are getting their guns, just that the delay and laws surrounding delays are opening the possibility that the gun sales are occurring. Now, the stores and states and all this, they can have their own policies whether or not they're going to complete a sale, and a lot of them don't. But that's the number that media is currently using, the 300,000 guns that could have been sold. Now, errors do occur in the system, and not all federal systems talk to each other in a efficient manner or share correct information or have accurate information, but that's just normal with any federal system, and we'll get to more of that. So some things do slip through and don't make it from one database to the next. Errors occur, and in gun sales, fraud is going to occur as well. Where there are already strict laws in place, people are going to try to find ways around the laws, and they will. It's simply human nature to try to break laws. For criminals break laws. Otherwise, there would be no crime. Now, this isn't a conversation to say that we should have more gun laws. I believe quite the opposite. And this definitely isn't a conversation that we need universal background checks. We don't, and we shouldn't. As I've said before, the Second Amendment says that our right to bear arms shall not be infringed, which of course means that there should not be a limit or violation of our rights. You can't take away a constitutionally guaranteed right because of a system that can never be perfect. Further, we have a system of checks and balances in place that allows the ATF to retrieve the firearms from those individuals when they have a background check that comes back as denied. So at least in the case of gun purchases, we do have a way to try to correct errors that are made. Again, it's not perfect. No process created by man ever will be. To the Democrats, though, this just isn't good enough. They want much tighter gun controls, much harder background checks, much longer delays to receive firearms, if they even want you to have a firearm at all. They want to make it as difficult as possible to exercise your Second Amendment rights. Yet, when it comes to voting, a right which is not even guaranteed in our Constitution, they don't care if it's easy. They don't care if fraud can be committed. They want us to believe that it just works the way it is. I don't know how they think that fraud doesn't and won't occur. We are supposed to question everything else going on in the government, question the legitimacy of our current president, believe that that what they tell us is broken, but we should just take their word that the election was perfectly fair and that all votes counted were legal, and that everyone should get to vote, citizen or not, criminal or not. They want to constantly talk about protecting people's rights. Constantly. They talk about rights and protecting everyone, but and especially in underserved races or communities, yet they want to take away or make it extremely difficult for those same people to exercise their constitutional Second Amendment rights. They want to convince us that a constitutionally protected right is less important than one that is not. Even if you look at the 15th Amendment, it does not explicitly say anyone has the right to vote. It only says that a right cannot be denied based on color. It was still up to the states to decide who has the actual right to vote. It just protected people of color from unequal treatment by the states. The 19th Amendment did the same thing to prevent discrimination based on sex. The 24th Amendment further protected U.S. citizens, especially those of lower income, from having to pay a tax or a poll tax to be able to vote. The 26th Amendment says no one can be denied the right to vote on account of age as long as they're 18 or over. These four amendments simply banned discrimination. They did not explicitly grant any rights. The right to vote is still left up to each state. This was the brilliance of the people that wrote our Constitution. They knew there were rights that had to be protected from the beginning, such as our right to gun ownership and speech, that no matter what the majority of that time or any time in the future, what the majority of people said, the minority had to be protected from that majority's desire to deny their rights. They also knew that the U.S. government, they couldn't control how each state voted. Way too many variables existed during that time, and a lot of those same variables still exist today, especially when we talk about how quickly votes can be counted. I mean, even today in 2020, some states were able to count votes much quicker than others, and here we are 8 days after the election, and still not all votes have been counted. A constitutional right to vote would be extremely difficult to legislate, to make all of the rules the same for each state. Sure, you could still give states the power to establish their own rules, but that would just make any voting right amendment to the Constitution kind of pointless, because you'd still have to grant all the power to the states. Granted, there's the argument that the Founding Fathers at the time didn't believe in the universal right to vote. And it did take constitutional amendments to stop limiting some of the rights that states were controlling. The great thing about our country is that we have at least always strived to, not always got it right, and we've all often had to take, course corrections, but at least we've always tried to move towards upholding the founding principle that all men are created equal. So there's been attempts, and there's currently some attempts, to introduce legislation to amend the Constitution to establish an explicit right to vote. The problem with this is that these same people that want a constitutional amendment to protect someone's right to vote going to stand up? When are these people going to stand up and acknowledge the fact that we have a constitutional amendment to protect our right to keep and bear arms? How can you place a limit on the Second Amendment and yet create a voting amendment with no limits, which is what some of them are proposing? You are going to allow U.S. citizens the unrestricted right to vote no matter what crime they have committed. This is a much more complicated process than just saying everyone has the right to vote. That's part of why it was left up to the states. I think maybe we could all agree anyone convicted of committing a crime against the United States, such as treason, should never be given their right to vote back. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we don't all agree on that, but just seems kind of, would be the right thing. If you've done anything against the United States, you probably shouldn't be participating in the elections. Anyway, a constitutional right to vote would have to have limits, And that's something not everyone is going to agree on. Maybe it is what is going to be required, and then years of arguing how to limit that right, just like has been done with the Second Amendment. And I mean, just look at Bush v. Gore in 2000. I mean, the court said that the individual citizen has no federal constitutional right to vote for electors for president anyway. So if you look at it, along those decision lines, I mean, what are we arguing over anyway? A little about how certain organizations of the government are trying to answer the voter fraud question. If you look at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's website, they've got a rumor control section where they're trying to debunk any claims of voter fraud. And I'm not going to go over all of them. I'll go over a couple. They state that it's only a rumor that votes are being cast and counted on behalf of dead people. Their reason for saying this is that state and federal law prohibits voter impersonation. Oh, okay. Well, I get it now. Why didn't they just say that at the beginning of this whole controversy? If the law prohibits it, then it's not happening. So I guess every person that claims to have been robbed, every murder, every act of violence, any laws that have ever been broken, it's just rumors, whether there's proof or not. I mean, what a perfect country we live in. The jails are all, filled with innocent people that were sentenced based on rumors. And I know this is probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but that is part of the stance that the CISA is taking. One of the other excuses they're giving is that I think we've all been hearing lately is a lot of these irregularities are clerical errors, or as they have it on their website, intended data practices. I'm just thinking intended. So they intend to maintain inaccurate voter registration data. So it's okay to not have the actual birth dates or years for those that are registered to vote. That's what the CISA is claiming is happening, that these states just, their records aren't accurate. I mean, let's go back and look at what happens sometimes with background checks for guns being delayed. It's a lot of times it's inaccurate data or data that's not shared. So again, you can deny people their right that is granted under the Second Amendment, but you're scared to deny someone a right to vote if they're providing false and inaccurate information or unverified information about who they are, and you won't deny them a right that is not guaranteed by the Constitution. Something seems a little wrong with that. I mean, CISA claims that each state regularly updates their information from vital statistics, but that's not possible if they don't have the accurate voter information to begin with. If you don't have someone's correct date of birth or year of birth, then when they die, you can't possibly update that information accurately. It just completely blows my mind that they want us to be convinced that the background check system is broken, but the election system, at least here in 2020, isn't. It's fact, not rumor, not speculation, not conspiracy. Votes are being cast. Ballots were requested and returned by deceased. Now, I don't know for sure that any of those votes are being counted. I think there's some verification that some of them has, some of it's been caught, some of it hasn't. That's something I've said before. That's something that the courts are going to have to figure out. But go try to buy a gun as a dead person. See how far that you can get. See which system is broken more, the background system or the voter system. But they want us to have complete and total trust in the voter system. There are so many U.S. gun laws today, and yet Democrats want us to believe more are needed. And with elections ran by hundreds or thousands of different ways and different rules all over the U.S., they're telling us there's nothing wrong with these. especially when the only checks and balances being ran to ensure there is not fraud in these systems, those checks and balances are being ran by the people that would be responsible if there was any fraud. We are asking a corrupt system to check itself for corruption. You have people on the left and the right all saying elections are subject to potential fraud. It just depends on what year it is, whose side you're on, what the election is, for who is crying the loudest about it at the time. Trying to get both sides to come together on a national registration, a voter ID policy, early voting, mail in voting, we all know that's going to be next to impossible. Just like gun control. If there is a right to vote amendment passed, we're going to be fighting about it for the next 100 years. I may be in the minority here. I don't know, but it's just my opinion. Gun rights and the right to vote, for me, they kind of go hand in hand. If you want a full, unrestricted constitutional right to vote, you should have the same unrestricted right already given to us by the Constitution to own our guns. If there is a law that removes the right or limits the right to own a gun, the same should apply to the right to vote. If a law is required for a background check, ID, waiting period, any of those things to purchase a firearm, those same rules should apply to receiving your voter registration. If you can vote at 18, you should be allowed to own a handgun at 18. The Democrats want to cry voter suppression if someone has to stand in line 2 to 4 hours to vote. What about the people standing outside of gun stores for hours or waiting up to 3 days? 3 days. They're worried about hours to vote on a right that is not granted by the Constitution. They're complaining about standing in line for hours, calling that voter suppression, yet we have a right granted to us by our Constitution that a lot of people have to wait 3 days to see if their background check comes through. No, who's being suppressed? Is that not suppression of their actually constitutionally protected Second Amendment right? I'm sure a lot of people that cry foul about standing in line to vote have no problem standing in line for a ride at Disney or to get the best Black Friday deals. I'm not saying it's that way for everyone, but we are so impatient as a society that we aren't willing to do what we have to do to participate in our democracy, if that includes standing in line. I guess the men and women who spent months and years away from their families to fight and die for our freedom to stand in line don't mean very much to those people that want to whine about standing in line to cast a vote. Millions of Americans of all colors have paid the ultimate price for you to be able to stand in those lines. I mean, this is it. We are a country full of hypocrites on all sides. We think our neighbors only deserve the rights and freedoms that we want them to have, and our neighbors only want to grant us the rights and freedoms they think we should have. That's why we're a broken country. There is no other reason. Give me the rights that I think I deserve, but let me take away the rights I think that you don't deserve. Else, I'm going to destroy your character, your family, your home, your business, your career, anything I can if you don't agree with me. That's who we've become as a country. You need to start appreciating the fact that all of our states are even giving us the right to vote for president. That's the only reason why we currently even have that right. It's not granted in the U.S. Constitution. It's a right given to the states. So stop abusing it. Be okay with your neighbors having the rights granted to them by the Constitution. Those aren't yours or anyone else's rights to take away or limit. As it says, these rights are inalienable. Doesn't matter how you feel about them. Doesn't matter if you like them. Doesn't matter how I feel about them or like them. They can't be taken away. Thank you for listening to The Independent Paradox. If you like what you've heard, please hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on those notifications.